Hi there. My name is Ron Gulen. I started my career in cybersecurity as a penetration tester, and I use scripts, common knowledge, and advice from my friends. And 20 years later, a lot of us are doing the same thing. Scythe allows you and your red team to change all of that and emulate not only more efficiency in your network, but emulate the best nation states and modern advanced persistent threats out there. This doesn't overwhelm your defense. It gives a scientific and realistic thing for them to train against and make sure they're not only configured right to detect these threats, but to respond and have the proper procedures. You can use automated continuous red teaming to make your red team the best one out there.
To find out more about Scythe, visit scythe.io/Security Weekly. Thinkst Canary makes high-fidelity honeypots that set up in minutes and requires no ongoing administration. Attackers moving silently on your network advertise their presence by tripping over them. There's a good reason Thinkst Canaries are deployed and loved by some of the best security teams in the world. They're inexpensive, they're simple, and they work. For more information, go to securityweekly.com/canary or direct message @ThinkstCanary on Twitter. In 2018, ransomware advanced significantly and is now capable of taking out infrastructure and operations across the globe. As a result, many organizations are bogged down in reactive work and often overlook the value of crucial information. In Domain Tools' Threat Intelligence Report, learn how to uncover some of the most critical insights from your organization's alerts and indicators that will allow you to shift to a more proactive posture. To download this white paper, please visit securityweekly.com/domain tools. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Lots of fun on the show this evening, and we still have stories to talk about, which is always fun and entertaining, regardless of the either good or really crappy stories we have to talk about. I want to remind everyone you can join the Security Weekly listener list, which is a duplicate announcement, I think. Yeah, I think it is. securityweekly.com/subscribe in case you missed it the first time. Let's see. We're talking about stories. Jeff and Lee are here with us, and I think that one of the top stories this week, hold on, it was in here, was...
Update, and maybe my story will be the top story.
Okay,
Refresh.
Jeff, go ahead.
Oh, it's a story about my alma mater, NSA.
His old tomato.
My clamato? What?
Oh,
tomato?
His old tomato.
Ex-NSA contractor set to plead guilty for theft of top secret information.
So, interesting article, and it just goes to show no matter how secure your environment or network is, somebody can still steal stuff.
Yep. I mean, insider threat is an interesting aspect, I think, of what we do. And I agree, Jeff, at the end of the day, an insider is probably the most difficult adversary to defend against.
So,
right?
so
Well,
Jeff, I'm curious,
Yep.
just to take it to the next level.
Sure.
How did the insider in this particular case get the material out of the organization? Do you know?
I don't know specifically, but it's not hard to do. I mean, if there's a lot of physical security protections. There's a certain amount of trust. I mean, you have to go through a background investigation. You have to go through a polygraph examination, and you get a re-polygraphed it used to be every 5 years. Because I mean, even when I started there in the 80s, there were at the time some very famous espionage cases that were essentially people that had stolen. In that case, it was stolen the keys that were enabled the Soviet Union to decrypt messages. So it's always been possible, and you can only do so much from a physical security perspective to reasonably let people through without causing mass uproar because of searching things. So, you're not supposed to, back in my day that we didn't even have mobile phones, so that wasn't an issue, but you weren't allowed to carry anything that would potentially be a transmitter or receivers, radios, cell phones, tape recorders. There used to be this thing called a Walkman. If you don't know what that is, Google it. Discmans, things like that. We weren't allowed to bring any kind of personal listening device, in or out. Cameras, obviously those were prohibited. But if somebody wants to print things out on a printer and stuff it in their sock and walk it out the door, nobody's doing a body search for people going in at the door type of thing. So I don't know how this guy did it, but there's ways to do it.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting
I brought this classified data for you that's up in my bum.
Right? And so I like watching documentaries about criminal organizations, right? And there's a great series on History Channel called Kingpin.
Yep.
There's another series that goes through like Hell's Angels and other criminal organizations. And I like, being a security person, I like to look for commonalities as to how we infiltrated their organizations and collected information. And the best I can surmise is that these criminal organizations are taken down is essentially with moles or double agents, right? It's an undercover agent. I mean, and this has been popularized in TV and movies all over the place. But if you look at the actual cases, right, it's because there was an insider inside those organizations. Now, these criminal organizations, it's a really hard thing to do. But if you think about it, in any corporation or enterprise or government agency, right, they have to deal with this particular threat. It'd be interested to see what my old question has always been, and I haven't seen any articles or evidence of this, is, when federal authorities infiltrate Hell's Angels, the mafia, the drug cartels, and the various criminal organizations figure out that this had happened, right? And usually, sometimes that ends horrifically, as is the case in the 80s, where El Chapo's organization was infiltrated by the DEA agent. He was tortured over 30 hours before he was killed. And like that, it's just horrific to even fathom that, right? And then, you see the other movies and cases where the moles do get out safely and they have to be very hidden, right, for a long time. But my question is, what do the criminal organizations do? And this has happened in cybersecurity as well. What do they do once they found a mole? How do they change and morph their security programs essentially to make sure that doesn't happen again? If you think about it, you're running this large criminal enterprise. You've been infiltrated by a mole. After that dust settles from that, you got to think that what are they, and criminals are in these larger organizations especially very innovative and creative to avoid detection. What do they do to detect the moles? How do they change?
Are you implying that they do more than the federal government or the DoD?
No, I don't think so, Jeff. I think you could use government agencies in the similar thing. I think a lot of it is you don't learn about that stuff because they don't want you to know how they're detecting moles after one has been disclosed. I think that's the same whether it's a criminal organization or a federal agency. I think it'd be interesting for both, Jeff, to your point, to see how they've changed their security architecture and programs and processes to detect moles in the future. Well, it'd be a valuable lesson for us is trying to prevent this in the enterprise.
To play the race condition on that too is that, how do those organizations detect that they have a mole so that it doesn't happen again? And then how does Brian Krebs change his tactics to infiltrate those?
Yeah, how does he flip people, and what methods do they go through to conceal the fact that they're leaking information, right? Yeah, it's great.
Well, so I can relate a different angle to it, and that is, I don't know if everybody remembers Wen Ho Lee out at Lanel and the lost hard drive behind the copy, or of course Snowden. And other incidents. But after each of those incidents, working in a federal agency, a new bunch of directives came out to better secure the systems to try and reduce the insider threat capabilities from, port lockdown. And yes, that started with epoxy in all the USB ports, which is really not a good solution. So every time something like that happens, everybody gets a, inoculation. They got to raise the bar. Are we detecting insiders any better? I'd like to hope so, but I think we're actually just locking down on prevention. Yeah. Unfortunately, we're doing really good at, looking for digital media, but printouts in the briefcase, they don't set off the metal detector.
Yeah. No, it's a great point, Lee, and it's interesting that, we talk about threat hunting, and during the break we were talking about breach and attack simulation and prioritizing where you need to put your defenses to defend against external attackers, right? Mm-hmm. And we were surmising that if you do threat hunting and you discover an external threat that successfully got in, that should take a higher priority. When you do breach and attack simulation, you can simulate various attacks, and if they're successful, now you have to prioritize them. But for an external threat, one that was successful should take precedence. Mm-hmm. When it's an insider threat, all the things that you can simulate that are successful are potential avenues for an insider to be able to get into things they're maybe not supposed to and exfiltrate data. So it's a very hard problem to solve.
And Security Weekly Book Club, as it were. We were talking about some of those tactics and stuff, and we talked about some of the crime organizations. One of the ones that I finished not that long ago was Spycraft: The Secret History of the CIA's Spy Techs from Communism to Al Qaeda. Mm-hmm. Amazingly fascinating with the technology that they worked with industry to come up with for all of their operations. It was just amazing.
Well, I'll say this. I can't speak for the organized crime, side of things, but I can certainly speak for the DoD side of things. And for a lengthier discussion, I actually touch on this a lot in a talk that I give that's entitled "Does DoD level security work in the real world?" So if anybody wants to, go find that, on YouTube. I've given that talk several times. I don't know which is the best version, but essentially, what the DoD has done over the years, going back to, probably the 30s, if not sooner, in terms of insider threat, you had spies and espionage. And in the quote unquote early days, the people that did that kind of stuff were politically motivated. They were communists, or, they had, other political aspirations. And so what evolved was, I mentioned polygraphs, background investigations. The government investigated, your life history to see if you had any kind of weird political bents. The background investigation is interviewing neighbors, friends from school, friends from work, friends from different, walks of life. So that was one element. But then, things came along, and, the bad guys, essentially the Soviet Union during the Cold War, one of the ways that they were able to turn people and get them to commit espionage was by finding out that they were doing naughty things. Maybe they'd, take pictures of them in a, some sort of liaison with, a woman or, somebody other than their spouse or partner, or most pointedly, people that back in 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s that were LGBTQ, and it wasn't really allowed to be able to say that publicly. And so if they had dirt on you in any way, so one of the series of questions that I was asked years ago during the polygraphs was about sexual orientation and sort of that side of your life, and so that was a thing. But then there was also and this was the case of the people in the 80s, Walker and Whitworth. Again, Google it; it's ancient history now. But they basically just did it for the money. So they would do as part of the background investigation. They would look at your finances. They would see if you had like odd spending habits. If you all of a sudden you're buying yachts and cars and things like that. If you had second homes, but you were just a data entry specialist in the basement of the DoD or whatever. So it's always by sort of the nature of security, at least in this perspective, has always been, you cover as many bases as you can, and then you find out somebody else's figures out not only a new way of doing things, but also the motivation. Why would somebody do stuff? And from a physical security perspective for insiders, that's kind of what you do, other than you have physical security guards, and you have rules about what you're allowed to walk in and walk out of the building and stuff like that. What I find interesting about sort of this quote unquote new interest in the insider threat is, because I've been in the business for so long, it's always been around, it's always been there, but we really never had a good answer for it. And it's not sexy and cool. I mean, I don't know if anybody's given many talks on, other than social engineering and physical security hacks. I don't really see a whole lot of talks or people giving, big, long, blogs or anything like that on the insider threat, other than sales and marketing for vendors that are, trying to come up with a new way to, to sell their products, or, we've covered everything else, now let's look at it. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing, from the perspective of, if we've covered everything else from a security perspective and that's the one thing that's left, great. To the degree that, okay, we've sold everything, we need to come up with a new story to tell, and maybe I'm still reeling from the RSA experience a couple weeks ago, but it seems like whenever I hear anybody talking about insider threat, it's coming from a sales and marketing perspective. It's, we're trying to sell something, not necessarily solving the problem, not necessarily having anything new and original, but it's another way to possibly sell your stuff.
Jeff, we're talking about background checks and how they check into a lot of, different things about you. And I think that actually segues into our story where the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States has named the ownership of Grindr a national security risk, as Grindr's ownership has transferred the majority of that ownership to a Chinese gaming company, Beijing Kunlun Tech Company Limited, and they have the CFIUS has intervened in the deal as a national security risk. And I think it actually relates to what Jeff was saying, is that if you have a clearance of any kind, right, if you have not disclosed something about you that you're trying to keep secret,
and you're on Grindr,
and you're on any site, in this case,
like that,
Grindr, right, that could be part of the reason why the U.S. government feels it could be a national security risk. And I think the nature of the site is irrelevant, right? If you're trying to conceal anything about you and you work for the government, you have any kind of clearance, right? That could be a potential issue, which is, I think, that Jeff hit on the real reason why there's concerns from the federal government about the ownership being based in China for, in this case, Grindr.
I have a friend who was really disappointed that Grindr was not a matchmaking site for knife makers.
Yeah, I could,
grind left, grind right.
Yeah, I could see that.
Mike
one of the when
Doesn't
I was
surprise
going
me.
through, especially the polygraphs, they would always, I don't know if anybody's ever had a polygraph. It's not like you see it on TV, not at all. But I'll let the suspense build. I'm not going to tell you what it's like. But they would basically, one of the things they did is they basically ask you all the questions ahead of time. This is, or at least topically, these are what we were going to cover. There's lifestyle questions, there's political questions, there's finance questions, that type of thing.
And that's part of the testing, Jeff, right? Does that help kind of normalize the results from the test by disclosing the topics that are going to be asked?
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole idea of a polygraph is they're trying to, they're monitoring all sorts of, body
responses.
You really do have wires everywhere.
Sure.
I don't know exactly.
I've seen it at DerbyCon. I think
that part of it,
Chris,
it's true.
Yeah.
What's not true, what you often see depicted on TV or movies, that you're just sitting in a chair and you're just kind of talking and flopping around. I mean, you're in a lazy boy recliner and you're as still as possible, because anytime you twitch, you're triggering a response. So I
have heard people say they've fallen asleep during a polygraph, and now that makes perfect sense, Jeff. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I the last polygraph I had, I was coming off working the midnight shift, so I'd been up for 24 hours. I'm in this easy chair.
Yeah.
The polygrapher is what we used to refer to them as, was a very attractive young lady named Ingrid. And she was as attractive as the name implies. That sounds real sexist. I'm sorry for all our listeners. But I was very relaxed. And have you ever had the experience where you sort of fall asleep and just kind of jerk yourself awake? and it's totally involuntary.
Screws up the test. Yeah.
I did one of those things, and they're like, "Whoa!"
Paul falls asleep and jerks himself awake, but it's something different altogether.
Yeah, well, that's
a different show.
Yeah,
different show, Larry.
Yep.
But the point I'm trying to make is, we can go into the details of polygraph, is when it was things like lifestyle questions, they would hammer home, they would repeat over and over again, don't worry about what you tell us. It's not that we care about what your lifestyle is. We just want to know about it so you can't be blackmailed.
Yep.
So they wanted you to say that you had, strange,
that you liked intercourse with goats.
Yeah, whether it was with, I started the job back in the 80s with a guy that was from Kansas, and he was making all sorts of jokes about cattle, and if you've ever seen Officer and a Gentleman, that type of thing. But the point is, at least at that point, it wasn't, don't tell us all your dirty secrets. Just don't keep any secrets from us. You were in more trouble if and that's one of the reasons I think why they told the questions ahead of time before they ever turned the machine on, is so that there would be no surprises. Now, there is a control question where they do throw a surprise at you, but that's another thing. But more importantly, they wanted you to be truthful, because there had been people that were forced into becoming spies because of blackmailing them because of their lifestyle. They didn't want that to be an issue. So to negate that, they said, just tell us all your dirty little secrets. And it was up to you whether you did it or not. What always tripped me up was like, have you ever stolen from the government? And it's like everybody struggled with that question, because you always walked home with the pens and the pencils and the notepads and sticky pads and stuff like that. And they're like, finally they said, have you ever stolen anything worth more than $100 from the government? And I'll move on.
Yeah.
Well, and while we're on the subject of the general subject of espionage and stuff, it was really cool at Secure World. Then on the tables in the main keynote area, and I should have brought them there actually in my car, but there were coasters, and the coasters, there was like 3 or 4 coasters in front and back. They summarized the story of, get the name right, and I don't know if you've heard of this woman, Elizabeth Smith Friedman. Anyone?
No.
Yes. If it's the same Elizabeth Friedman that I think it is.
So she was instrumental in code breaking, including the Enigma, which I always attributed to Alan Turing, but apparently Elizabeth Friedman also had a hand in cracking the code. In some of her work, she was looking for rum runners and stumbled across the German codes and helped crack them as well. So Jeff, I figured you had heard of this story and could elaborate. I thought it was fascinating.
Well, for starters, she was married to this guy named.
Yeah, he was.
She was married to William Friedman. They were together, considered sort of the founders, the godparents of modern cryptography.
Okay.
There's actually I saw a talk. I guess 2 ShmooCons ago. They're buried, I think, in Arlington National Cemetery, and on their tombstone is a cipher. So if you ever make it down there, you should go check it out, or find the ShmooCon talk on the Friedman tombstone. It's also depicted or talked about at the National Cryptologic Museum. When in Maryland, visit the National Cryptologic Museum. But let me pull up the story. What was... I didn't see.
I didn't add a story. I was just kind of going on what I observed at
just
Secure
basic.
World. Yeah, and I thought it was interesting. And in one of the coasters, it talked about how she presented in court how basically a cipher was deciphered into a message and wrote on the chalkboard during the trial and explained how they derived the plain text from ciphertext, essentially. And that was, that really kind of upped my respect, is not only did you understand how all of this stuff worked before we had all of this technological revolution and encryption that we have today, but she could also convey it to
the layperson
that wasn't familiar with cryptography. And I thought that was pretty special and pretty awesome. And I was glad Secure World kind of brought that to the forefront of all of these security professionals who got together in Boston this week.
So, you mentioned the Turing machine and breaking the Enigma machine. Most people's knowledge of the Enigma machine comes from the movie The Imitation Game.
Yep,
and
great movie.
They touch on it very lightly. But I mean, what Turing did was build a machine that could essentially speed up the process of brute forcing. Now there was a cryptographic attack in that they, where the Germans screwed up in the Enigma machine was that they began every message with Heil Hitler.
Right.
So when you have a
plain
plain
text recovery attack,
on over multiple message, that gives you an advantage. Let's just leave it at that.
Right.
But they touch on it in the movie, but not. I paid attention. I caught it. I don't know how many people caught it.
I agree, Jeff.
I
feel like it should have.
They were breaking the messages, but it took doing it by hand, and they had lots of women working on it, and it was distributed processing, if you will.
Yes.
And they could break the messages, but it would take days or weeks or whatever. Whereas the Turing machine,
I gotcha,
did it quickly enough
that
they could. So the technique, he didn't develop the technique. He just developed the machine.
Automation.
He automated the technique.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a good way of thinking of it. Yeah.
Yep.
Which is what I hated the most when I was a cryptographer at NSA working on operations side, breaking codes. As soon as you'd break a code, you had to turn it over to a bunch of computer programmers, and they'd automate it. So you didn't get to do it anymore. You had to go tackle a new puzzle.
Right.
I understood it, but it still took. It's like, well, I don't want to break it too soon because
then I go to work on it anymore, right?
Then I got to work on another puzzle
and start all over again, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I thought that was really cool from Secure World, which was a good conference, by the way. What I really loved was when I walk the show floor now, that my role has changed, where I get to do a lot more briefings and understand what a lot more vendors do. Is I could really spend more time with the vendors I was not familiar with already, right? Because I spent more time briefing, I'm like, either they're a sponsor, or if they're not, I've done a briefing, I understand what they do. So the list of booths that I had to visit that I had never heard of before was shorter, which is great. So I get to spend time with the ones you may not have heard of yet, and schedule briefings with them. So you'll see a lot more of that information come on the shows. And speaking of cryptography, I felt really bad and somewhat naive in that I've been using SSH since the beginning of my career, right? Like that, when I started in the late 90s, there was a lot more Telnet than there is today, and I feel like there's still Telnet today, of course.
There's way too much Telnet.
There's still way too much Telnet, right? But it was a lot more 20 years ago. And so I would obviously adopt SSH, right? Compile SSH, use SSH, and SSH.com is the commercial entity. What I had lost sight of, or never really researched that much, that I feel bad about it, is the guy that created the first open source version of SSH is in fact the founder of SSH.com. And so when I saw them there, I'm like, look, I see your, updates and everything. I'm like, what are you up to today? And they're briefing me on what they're doing. And I said, look, your founder who created SSH has a free ticket to come on the show and talk about it. It's not sponsored. It's not paid. It's whatever. It's a thank you for his original contribution and continued contributions to the open source community. And they were giving me little snippets, because they immediately kind of latched on to my fascination with it. And they were like, yeah, we've talked to him about that. And he's got lots of little stories to tell and little snippets of working with Linus and in the whole thing. So I'm excited. We're gonna work to get him on the show on this show on Pulse Security Weekly and have him tell the story. I'm like, how have we not done this? It's another how have we not done this before? So that, to me, that was one of the highlights that came out was folks who are instrumental in implementing the technology that we use today, need to certainly have a spot on this show.
And I think one of those other ones that you had, I think might have some interesting stories to tell security-wise was that was free, right? Oh, no, it was actually shareware.
Oh, yeah. And so, and the other one that I visited that I had not done a briefing with was PKware.
Yeah.
And I approached the booth, and it happened to be the CTO of the company, which is all. I mean, that doesn't always happen, right? Especially at local shows, it tends to be staffed by salespeople, which is totally fine. Like, I get it. That's cool, right? But he was the CTO of the company, and I said, all right, so hold on. Like, before we get started, let me just give you my initial impression. You're called PKware. I see a little bit of your messaging. I'm like, is that like PK Zip? And was that like free software back in the day? And he was like, well, it's actually shareware. And I was like, right, moving right along. Because, back in the day, it was abused basically to bypass the shareware. And then I kind of felt bad, but there are...
Shareware is a euphemism for freeware.
Right. And so I thought that was cool. And they have technology that's applicable to what you do today. So I'm glad you brought that up, Larry. There's two companies that, had a rich history in technology and even security that are still in business today, doing things that are applicable today that, should be highlighted. So that was pretty cool.
Raise your hand if you used Secure Shell or remember using Secure Shell before there was putty.
Ooh.
Hello.
Yep.
All right. Oh, good. Everybody.
In the history is interesting, right? You'd have to compile it, right? And feature parity sometimes was not there. What they were telling me, Jeff, it's a great point, is that they didn't support certificates in the open source version. That was in the commercial version, and then the open source version caught up, which is sometimes the other way around, right? But I thought that was pretty cool. So.
Another
Do you
nice
remember compiling it with the R command support to get systems stopped using the old insecure Berkeley R commands, using the SSH R commands instead?
Yep. Absolutely.
Yes.
Bruce and I gave the keynote, and Matt and I summarized that in a segment that'll run. But I do have to say one thing that I was impressed with was Bruce presented without slides, which I thought was, and let me tell you, if you've ever tried to present without slides, it's challenging. Mm-hmm. Bruce held my, and I don't know the rest of the audience, right, but held my attention talking without slides. And one of the things I really liked about Bruce's presentation was how he really described security as having unique challenges from other industries that don't have the same challenges we do. I thought was good, and just had a lot of great knowledge to share, an interesting perspective on some of the problems that we talk about on the show. Articulated that very well, and without slides, I thought that was pretty cool.
I'm so proud of Bruce. He's come such a long way. Did I tell you guys my RSA Bruce Schneier story?
Maybe.
Well, I'll tell it real quickly if I may.
Sure.
And it's sort of penance, if you will. And, he gave one of the keynotes at RSA, and I was watching it in the press room, and it was funny because there was no audio. So he's very animated, doing all sorts of stuff, and I was like, man, this would be a great meme. Just take I took a couple second video of him. It's like, what is Bruce saying now? And I went away and I came back to get lunch, and he was in the media room also enjoying our free lunch. And the only seat that was free was like right next to him. So I was like, and I've never really I've met him a few times, but I've never really talked to him. So I asked him if the seat was available, and he was like, buried in his laptop typing. And he's like, yeah, go ahead, gesture. So I sat down, I started eating, and I leaned in and I said, when you're done doing your thing, I would like to speak to you for a minute. And he sort of nodded. He's a little bit quirky,
standoffish.
No, I quite the contrary. I think he's very personal, because my quick story, Jeff, is I was showing Joe the speaker room.
Interrupt my story for your story.
Go ahead. Hold on. But Joe and I go into the speaker room, which we're not supposed to be in, right? But it kind of looks like a dungeon with it, because it's all brick and cinder block and pipes running in there. And I was like, it's kind of weird to have this be the speaker room. I'm like, go check it out with me really quick. And I walk in, and Bruce is the only other person in the speaker room, and he kind of looks at me, and I was like, hi Bruce, like, you've been on our show, like, I'm Paul, and he was very, very cordial and very, very polite and very personal, Jeff, just to kind of say that. Yeah.
And he was, as the story unfolds, because I was talking to other people, and at some point he started snickering and sort of joined in the conversation, and that was my cue that, okay, he's done doing whatever he's doing.
Sure.
So I told him, I said, I've been wanting to say this for years because, you don't know me, but I'm an ex-NSA cryptographer, and I remember reading your applied cryptography book back when I was still at NSA, and to be honest with you, when I read it, I thought, wow, this guy's a moron. And I said, but you redeemed yourself later on when you wrote your book. I have it up on my shelf, Secrets and Lies.
Yep.
Because basically in Secrets and Lies, he said, and I actually saw a quote from him today where I think this is part of his banter now, is he realizes that when he wrote Applied Cryptography, he was kind of young and naive and didn't, because basically the premise of the book was, security is not a problem, just encrypt everything and you're done.
Sure.
And it was very kind of nearsighted. And
but
so
Jeff,
said,
those of us like myself that like I'm not like the best at encryption. I liked applied cryptography because it allowed me to learn and understand the way different encryption technologies work.
You learned learned the way of the Force.
And that's
right.
That was the value that I got from it.
So what was his reaction?
Well, he's like, oh, you mean like the part where I was naive and thought encryption solved everything? I said, yeah, that part. I said, but you redeemed yourself, but I just wanted to tell you, just sort of apologetically, that I thought you were I initially thought you were an idiot, but you've come a long way, and we went on to have a conversation about other things.
Yeah,
and
Bruce and he strikes me as that person that can take that feedback and have a conversation, and doesn't hold a grudge or anything like that. Like he's cool. He's like I said, very.
I even got him to take a selfie with me. I put it up on our Slack channel. So, and.
And he gave a great. I mean, and to your point, Jeff, right? He gave a great keynote. And I respect him.
I don't know. I didn't
thoughts.
Hear it. All I saw was the gestures.
Yeah, and his thoughts and opinions were. Matt and I both listened to the keynote and really enjoyed it. So, yeah, and the other keynote we had Steve.
I'm not
Brown.
saying he's still a moron. I just said that was an initial impression.
Bruce is cool. We should bring Bruce back on the show.
We should do that.
And the other keynote at Secure was Steve Brown. And remember, we had him on the show? And the feedback that I got was about 3/4 through Steve's keynote, he excused himself. He said, I'm having a medical emergency, and excused himself and like basically went to the hospital. Wow. And I was very concerned. And this morning I was thinking about that. I'm like, I really hope Steve's okay. Like, I got to ask around. Lo and behold, I'm walking the show floor. And there's Steve, and I'm like, dude, you okay? Like, legit. I was thinking, he's like, yeah, I'm fine. He's like, my dad had a heart attack, and he's okay, but I started feeling like really dizzy and lightheaded. He's like, but I'm okay. I'm getting on a plane. I'm going to give another keynote, somewhere else in the U.S., like in Arizona or something. But he was okay, and we basically, Matt and I were like, dude, if you're near Rhode Island anytime, come in studio and hang out with us. So, if you caught wind of that at Secure World, Steve's okay, which is good to hear.
Like, been there, done that.
Right? And a lot of us that have presented have been in similar situations. So, yeah, totally relate to that for sure. And glad that Steve is okay. All right. What else we got for stories? In the news, there was an interesting article that really ended up being a link to a webcast, which one was it? Oh, I just liked the title of this. Now, it turns out there was no substance behind the article. I left it in because I thought that the title was really good. I think Larry and Joff could probably speak to this quite a bit.
I think I know what it is.
Story number 2, right? Advanced Breach Protection Demystified the Untold Truths of Security Beyond AV.
See, and I thought it was everything I needed to know about third-party risk management. I learned
number
from
6 was my choice.
Yeah, number 6 was pretty interesting as well. Now, these did come from Dark Reading, I think both of them. who has changed their site around a bit and not require like registration to read them. And I have to say the content on a couple of them were pretty good.
Yep.
But story number 2, Advanced Breach Protection Demystified: Untold Truths on Security Beyond AV. I thought it was a great topic. I think it's a great topic, right? It's one we talk about a lot. I think that a lot of us could have a lot of input as to what you would, if that was the title for your presentation, what would you say, right? So much.
Right. So much. And I've only got an hour to tell it, right?
An hour wouldn't be enough, right?
Yep.
No.
Well,
So,
I mean, look,
I had a Christmas story moment when I started going through this article and saying it's a bloody commercial. But that's what you said. It leads to a webcast.
I was going to say it's a commercial.
Content free or what?
And again, I just think it's a cool title. Yeah. Joff?
It is awesome.
I was just going to say, this is the classic known knowns versus the unknown unknowns.
Mm-hmm.
It's we all know doing research and actually producing malware that can evade a lot of AV. I mean, the real fact of the matter is AV is really good at known research stuff, right? It's really good at that. And you shouldn't detract from that. That's a positive, right? It's stuff that needs to be defended against. The other stuff, that's where the stuff of the EDR market is largely going for. It's more of the unknown material, trying to do heuristic approaches, trying to use cloud approaches to check reputation, all the rest of it. That's important, but there's too many techniques to get around it. I mean, the fact of the matter is
it really that important?
I think it's the perception of endpoint security that really kind of messes with things, right? And I think
you're right.
Right. I think you should look at it as something that catches known threats and puts it in that category. Like, you can't just do that and be done. And we can make a lot of analogies that I really don't think are that good, right? Mm-hmm. To like the locks on your car or home, or to me that doesn't really convey the message of, I think you need it. You need something on the endpoint that is going to protect the, I hate to even to say low-hanging fruit, right? But protect the things that they can protect you against.
You ought to
right?
drink after saying something like that.
Right. I'm going to take that back. I'm redacting that, right? Protect my endpoint systems against things that are ridiculously easy to protect, and maybe in some cases, a little more advanced, and you're not done after that, right? It's a way to reduce the noise more so than make sure I never get hacked. Is that better? Is that better, Jeff? I think that's better. A little better.
It's a little bit better, but I mean, what you're saying though is one of my problems with the industry as a whole is that we have invested trillions of dollars over the last 25 years in sort of doing what you described, rather than doing stuff that we've I don't know how else to say it, but we address over and over again the low hanging fruit and don't necessarily address the things that we were talking about with Chris in the tech segment.
Yep.
And or even the whole idea of the insider threat. I mean, a lot of this thing about security is very imprecise and inaccurate, and it has to do with things that we simply can't just buy a solution for, and that's what we don't tend to talk about. I don't think.
Right, but enough. I think when I think about it in the context of our tech segment, right, how difficult, even more difficult, our jobs would be if we didn't have something on the endpoint that could protect against some level of threats, right?
That's one of the big ironies, though. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
No, I think it's got value. I mean, right? So there's significant research efforts happening on the part of multiple parties, which are contributing to the AV and EDR community to say this is how malware on the whole performs, how it acts, how it's signatured. that's still got value. I mean, that stuff is, if you're knocking out some common threats, it's not a bad thing. And it's a very, very good thing. You're not knocking out sophisticated threats, but there's so much of the remainder of the community that is working on the more sophisticated threats, just as we had tonight, right? We're talking about ACM. We're talking about some of the efforts to actually look at more of a heuristic approach at what the threats are doing on the network. That's a very different thing to traditional endpoint defense. I think it all has something to add in a cumulative kind of sense.
In the last 5 minutes, I want to round out this discussion and talk about maybe one more story.
I have one that I'd love to talk about. That's actually not one of my stories.
Okay, let's do it, Larry.
It's one of Lee's stories. His number 4. Russia is spoofing GPS signals on a massive scale.
Interesting.
Yeah, Lee, I thought this was absolutely fascinating. Specifically, how they were able to determine that this was happening by comparing it to other sets of data. Like the big one is that they're finding that ships are either going off course or something of the like to avoid VIPs' homes that are waterfront. And they compared the GPS data that was logged via folks that were monitoring via other open protocols like AIS. So AIS is sort of like ADSB for ships. ADSB is the navigational stuff for airplanes to broadcast where they are, and AIS is the same for ships, so to speak. In that those folks that were monitoring AIS were noting that in certain locations, the AIS reporting over the air in the radio was completely erroneous. Like they were showing ships that were in the middle of land somewhere where it was clearly not possible. So, go ahead, Lee.
I just thought it was really interesting that they could do that so successfully. I mean, I was mistakenly on the impression it was hard to do. But what did they say? 1,311 records where the ships weren't where they were expected to be? That doesn't sound so impossible.
No. Yeah, no, Lee, let's have a conversation offline about about that one, about how difficult it is to do. And the other one that I think that's kind of fascinating about that is that if we think about the GPS technologies that are available in like consumer devices and even some of the more enterprise stuff that are used to populate AIS and airplanes and ships and all of this stuff, that how many of them are reliant on one data source for their location? Because all of that data source is effectively unauthenticated. It's garbage in, garbage out. And where there are multiple competing technologies available and that you could potentially build the receivers into these devices to aggregate these multiple data to see which ones are correct and which ones are wrong and which ones are being... Now you have to potentially up the game to spoof like GPS, GLONASS, Beidou, and Galileo all at the same time. Like, do they all match?
That begs the question, Larry, and I don't know the answer, so I'm asking you. When it comes to GPS, is it simply a matter of like a one-for-one, here I am talking to whatever the GPS satellites, or is there still a concept of triangulation to determine location?
Yeah, there's the concept of triangulation and time and lots of complex math there, but still, the complex math is known, and you could potentially send signals to a GPS receiver, making it look like those satellites are putting it somewhere else on the planet. So, absolutely, the math is known, and it's all.
Also, isn't all the triangulation for GPS is within GPS satellites? It's not you're triangulating multiple sources. It's a bunch of GPS satellites.
It's multiple satellites.
But if you're messing with GPS signal, game over.
Right.
Interesting.
Awesome.
Speaking from someone that may or may not have done that on a small scale in a Faraday cage.
I was going to say, right? I think we even had a little demonstration of that at some point.
Yeah. But did you reverse time, Larry?
No comment. Wait for my upcoming talk circuit.
It's just a tease.
Larry has the green Infinity Stone.
When are you doing this talk, Larry?
As soon as I get some more research time in.
Your new nickname is Dr. Strange now.
So
quite possibly could be my favorite Marvel character, by the way.
I have not seen it, but I'm going with the.
You should totally watch it.
I need to, and I'm more inclined to go with the talk title of how I learned to become a Time Lord.
Well, yeah, and you should, before you do that presentation, watch Doctor Strange.
Okay.
For sure.
I haven't.
Yes, you must. Okay. You must. I like it because it's kind of like Marvel's Kung Fu movie.
Oh.
Like I haven't given the talk, a lot of people have seen the talk on the Kung Fu talk that I do on everything I learned about security. I learned from watching Kung Fu movies. And my kids really being into Marvel, I've watched like all the Marvel movies now, almost all of them. And when I watch Doctor Strange, I'm like, dude, that's their Kung Fu movie.
Nice.
And because it hits on one of the predominant themes in Kung Fu movies that also translate into security, and that is your master will be reluctant to train you and will be in some faraway place that you have to go seek out. And it embodies that. That is a part of the storyline in Doctor Strange, and really, I think is makes it their Kung Fu movie. Yeah. And the special effects story and everything or as Johnny was saying, like are in line, certainly, and spot on. But yeah, hearing what you're going to talk about, it's a must watch, and because you will have graphics and relations and help the audience kind of relate to your topic if they've seen that movie, will definitely help too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So awesome. Well, everyone, thank you so much for.
If you don't mind, quick plug.
Quick plug. Sure.
Quick plug. We've had success with this in the past. We're at Guardians. We're currently hiring some. We're looking for some seasoned red teamers, pen testers of all sorts of varieties, and it's happened in the past. And we've got some of our best folks by saying, "Hey, throw us a resume." Oh, I'm not worthy. Bits are cheap. Tempt the fates. Send me an email, Larry@guardians.com. We'll get it to the right place, and we're actively looking.
Yeah, Larry, I knowing you guys at Guardians for so long that it's not about it is about your skill set, but you're not pigeonholing someone into a skill set, right?
No.
Knowing you guys, you're some of the most like creative and talented people in the industry. So, what you bring to the table if you're applying. Don't think like, I need all these specific skills, because likely you're hiring outside of the norm where people say, well, you got to have this cert and you got to have this many years of experience with this. I imagine that's not your hiring process, right? Yep. You're hiring people that are equally as talented and creative in their own right. Mm-hmm. And so, don't be shy in applying.
I mean, to give you an example, my intern was 19 years old at the time. Mm-hmm. Brought her on as an intern. Amazing. No intention of going to college. Mm-hmm. Amazing developer. Has a security mindset because of the household they grew up into. Sure. And now she's an amazing web app pen tester and creates tools like nobody's business, and is awesome. A huge asset to our team.
There you go.
So that's really cool.
I think there's.
If I may
agree with you, Larry.
Talking to Faith over the years as being your intern, you had her working on some amazing shit. I mean, she was doing all kinds of neat projects.
Yeah, and
just to follow on what Paul's saying.
Yep, and it was stuff that was completely out of something that she had no concept of before. Like, oh, you do music? Great. Here's some software-defined radio stuff I need you to work on.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was,
I think that goes to our diversity conversation in the beginning of the show, right? Yeah.
Oh, we've come full circle.
Absolutely. So everyone, thank you for listening and watching Paul Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Over and out.